It was supposed to happen this week, but Brexit, the United Kingdom's exit from the European Union, has again been postponed. Sounds simple, but the story is anything but. With us now to help sort it all out, on the line from Waterloo, Ontario, Oonagh Fitzgerald. She is Director of International Law at CIGI, the Centre for International Governance Innovation. And Oonagh, it's good to have you on TVO tonight. How's it going?
Very well, thanks. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, as we suggested, the UK was supposed to be on its way out on Halloween. I'm sure that's just a coincidence and not meant to be politically reflective of anything. But it seems not to be the case anymore. And for those who haven't followed every single in and out of this story, why is it not happening on the 31st?
Okay, let me provide a little bit of background. So it was supposed to happen on the 31st, and that was an extension. Already there have been several extensions. And Boris Johnson was forced to request an extension a few days ago, and it was finally agreed to by the Europeans yesterday. He had to do that because he had run out of time, and in fact there was an amendment, the Ben Act, that was passed by members of Parliament to force him to request an extension if he could not get the agreement of parliamentarians to his withdrawal agreement. So on 2 Saturdays ago, there was a Super Saturday emergency debate in the UK Parliament, and Boris Johnson was hoping that his withdrawal agreement would get the approval of parliamentarians. But in fact, they didn't give him that. They said they were not ready to approve it until they could actually see the entire withdrawal agreement bill and pass that. And because they did not approve the withdrawal agreement on that Saturday, that forced Boris Johnson to seek this extension. That was the Ben Act that required it. And so he requested that extension.
The president of the European Council, I gather, is calling it a flex-stension. Do you know what that means?
Yes. It was a very strange letter that Boris Johnson wrote. In fact, he sent basically 3 letters. One was saying, you know, according to the Ben Act, I have to ask for this extension. A second one was saying, please find attached this letter requesting an extension, but it was not signed by the Prime Minister. And then the third was a letter signed by the Prime Minister in which he said, I really don't want an extension. So the Europeans had a lot to think about, you know, how to play this. They knew that parliamentarians and Boris Johnson would all be, you know, strategizing about this and trying to figure out how to get advantage. So they held off giving the extension until yesterday. And what they ended up saying was, you know, it's an extension until January the 31st, but you can get out of it each month in that period if you're ready to get out before then. So, you know, it could allow for an early extension. And of course, there is always the possibility of having to have a further extension, but that was not discussed.
Now, the Prime Minister did say for weeks and weeks that he was adamantly not going to do this, and yet here we are. Did you see this volte-face coming?
Well, indeed, he said that he'd rather die in a ditch than do this. And he was decidedly sulky on Saturday, Super Saturday, after not getting what he wanted, you know, denying that he was going to go and request it. But he had to do it. In fact, there'd been a case before the Scottish courts actually pressing to make sure that the government would request an extension if the circumstances arose, you know, the Ben Act circumstances. And so that case had been kept open because nobody really trusted Boris Johnson. And it was really in the, you know, the 11th hour at night that he did send for the extension. So his credibility is not very strong anyway. He's not known as somebody who prides himself on truthfulness. So this is just another volte-face on his part.
Well, there do seem to be a number of different options for getting out of the pickle that that the UK is in right now. And general election is one of them. Another referendum is another one of them. And I think we've got a public opinion survey here from YouGov, which basically shows that 40% of the people, which is not a majority, but it is the largest chunk, 40% of the people would love another referendum, 35% are content to go for an election, and 25% just don't know which way they'd rather go. As you think about these options, what do you think makes the most sense for Britain right now?
Well, I think it probably would have made most sense for Boris Johnson not to pick up his Withdrawal Act bill, as he did a few days ago, and just walk away with it and then request an election. It would have been better if he had agreed to a reasonable period of time to debate that bill. And now that bill, the Withdrawal Act bill, is the one that would implement the agreement with the Europeans. And obviously, it's full of all kinds of detail because it's amending the laws of the UK that have existed over the last 40 years. And it really requires very thoughtful analysis. And indeed, some of the parties were interested in making amendments to the bill, such as to include a requirement to go back to the people for a confirmatory vote. So, for example, saying, requesting the people, do you agree with the terms that we've now negotiated? Are you ready to go forward with Brexit, or would you prefer that we not go forward with Brexit? So that bill would have been an attempt to do, an opportunity to do that. I mean, that's certainly something Boris Johnson didn't want to see in there. He was trying to get that whole bill through in 3 days, which was ridiculous. So that might have been the most sensible thing to do, and probably what the Europeans were hoping for. But instead, he got frustrated when he couldn't get his planning of a 3-day review of the bill through Parliament, and he pulled it, and he went back to his demand to have an election. So we really are now very seriously in the question of an election. They're debating it today. The Labour Party has also indicated, Corbyn has indicated that he would probably support an early election now that the Europeans have at least confirmed that they've given an extension. He was concerned about agreeing to an election before because he was afraid that Boris Johnson would then do something to cause a crash out of Brexit, so of the EU. So right now, it does look like an election's the most likely outcome, and it's anyone's guess as to what the results of that election will be. To some extent, it will be about the referendum that happened in 2016, but it'll also be a bit of a referendum on the MPs who haven't been able to solve this for the last 3 years.
Yeah, I guess we should clarify for our viewers or listeners who don't realize this. The Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, thanks to a relatively new law, cannot simply, whenever he wants to, walk to the Queen's residence and say at Buckingham Palace, Your Majesty, dissolve Parliament, I want to go to the polls now. If he wants to go early, he needs Parliament's permission. He hasn't been able to get it so far. Looks like he will be able to get it now. And, I know handicapping elections, 2 months before they're going to happen is probably a fool's errand. But having said that, based on the state of play today, can you give us your best sense about who's up, who's down, who's got the best shot of winning, who appears to be completely in the wilderness?
Well, just on, it's very difficult to give that. I mean, obviously, Boris Johnson thinks he's got an opportunity here, that he could sort of turn all his trials and tribulations against the opposition parties and say that he's just been trying to get Brexit done. But there are even people within his own party are pointing out that he hasn't really done a very good job of demonstrating his perseverance in getting Brexit done. So who knows? A number of the Conservative Party members have been kicked out for various votes against the government. What will they do? Will they be able to run for the Conservatives, or will they be running in other parties? The Lib Dems have had a bit of a success over the last few weeks and months, and they may see some opportunity here. There's also a sense that as time passes, the people who voted for Brexit are probably no longer going to be part of the electorate because it was mostly older people, and that new people who have now earned the right to vote by turning 18, that they will change the election results to some extent. They're more likely to vote Labour or Lib Dem. Or SNP, and then there's also, I should mention, that's the Scottish National Party. I should mention, you were talking about the rules around elections, and they do have a fixed term election act, which requires 2/3 majority by the House to have an election out of the fixed term period. And Boris Johnson has tried that 3 times and failed. Today, what they're doing is trying to amend that act. And to amend the act, strangely, all you need is a one-person majority. So it looks like, more likely that the election might occur as a result of this process today. But there's been a motion already by the opposition that will allow them to amend the bill. And they're looking at changing the date to an earlier date, so December 9th. They're also looking at including more young people in the votes, so having 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds vote, and also having European citizens who are resident in the UK participate. So I don't know if those pieces will be found to be within the terms of the bill and therefore allowable, but there's still a bit of uncertainty about how this election might play out.
Gotcha. Let's talk about Northern Ireland for a few moments here, because one of the sticking points in the negotiation has always been the status of Northern Ireland's relationship with the Republic of Ireland, with the rest of the United Kingdom, whether the border is going to be a hard border or a sticky border or a softer border. And of course, the current Conservative government depends on, I can't remember how many it is now, is it 10 MPs from the Irish-based party for its continued existence? So it all gets very complicated and mushy. Can you uncomplicate and unmushy it for us, please?
I will try, Steve. Okay, so the reason there has been peace and tranquility, really, between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland has been partly because they are all in the European Union, meaning there's no borders between any of these parts of the UK and between the Republic of Ireland. So goods are flowing back and forth between Northern Ireland and the Republic easily every day, all day long. And the question about the UK leaving means that what happens to that border? And it was a real sticking point for Prime Minister May. And she had proposals that were put forward which included the backstop, which was much resisted by the hardline Brexiters that really wanted Brexit to happen immediately and dramatically, meaning that everybody gets out of the customs union and the single market. Now, what Boris Johnson has negotiated is a different kind of a backstop. In fact, he's put the border now in the North Sea between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, in that what will happen in Northern Ireland is they will still be subject to a customs union with the Republic of Ireland. So goods will flow back and forth easily there. There won't be any tariffs or anything like that. But as soon as goods are coming in from the UK into Northern Ireland, they will have to go through some sort of customs process. And similarly, as goods leave Northern Ireland to go into the UK, they will have to go through a customs process. So this has really infuriated the DUP, which is the party you were referring to that has been sort of holding up the Tory party and allowing them to have something close to a majority. And they've refused to vote in favor of Boris Johnson's agreement with the European Union. So they're not going to back it. And I guess we'll have to see how that will play out.
I guess an election could clarify these matters if we get results that are somewhat different from the status quo. Is that fair to say?
It could, yes. And people think that this issue about Northern Ireland, it could play out over a long period of time. I mean, just to go back to the referendum, Northern Ireland actually voted in favor of staying within the EU, as did Scotland. So, these parts of the UK are now very concerned about Brexit, and they feel a strong allegiance to the benefits of being in the EU. So even if Brexit was to go ahead, it could have impacts on the shape of the United Kingdom going forward, the possibilities of further referendum in Scotland or a referendum in Northern Ireland to consider joining the Republic of Ireland. So all in all, there's a great deal of discontent in Northern Ireland. The Unionists feel deserted by the government in Westminster. And it'll be really interesting to see how this all shapes up.
Mm-hmm. Now, this has been sort of a very hot story following every twist and turn of it for the last many years. But let me add at the same time that sometimes media breathlessly report on every single little twist and turn in the road. and everything is a crisis all the time. Having put all that foundation for this question in place, I do want to find out from you how much you think all of this drama has genuinely affected the United Kingdom's ability to be good partners with their allies in the world, to run their economy properly, to give the sense that they are a trustworthy partner on the world stage. What's your take on all of that?
Well, I think it has done quite a lot of damage to the United Kingdom. I was not a huge fan of Theresa May when she was Prime Minister, but at least she kind of, kept the trains running, so to speak. Whereas Boris Johnson has just been chaos from the first steps he's taken. And he was a chaotic foreign affairs minister when he did work for Theresa May under her government as well. I think the reputation of the UK has been severely damaged. The EU would dearly love them to, make a decision here. Obviously, they would prefer them to stay in the European Union, but at this point, they would just like them to get on with things so they can negotiate a new trade agreement. The UK will have to negotiate many new trade agreements with Canada, with the US, many other countries, since it will no longer be able to benefit from the agreements it has as part of the EU. And people will be concerned about whether they are a reliable trading partner and what it means when they make a deal. So I do think this says something about the UK. I know their whole idea was this is going to be a new future for the UK as a new leader in the world, but they are failing to recognize that in the world of superpowers, the UK really is not one of them anymore. And it was stronger as part of the EU, and now it's going to be fighting some very difficult battles on its own. And just on the issue of trade, the more you can have a level playing field in terms of your regulatory standards in different countries, the more likely you can make trade deals. And the UK doesn't seem to want to keep the same standards as it had with the EU. And that's just going to be a sticking point in the trade deal with the EU when it comes up. And it'll be a sticking point in trade deals with everyone, because no one wants a country to use low regulatory standards as a way to cheat them in trade deals. Mm-hmm. So the UK is in a difficult position, and hopefully through this election, the people of the UK will be able to set them on a better course so that Parliament can once again become functional, and they can resume their place as a sensible country.
Oonagh, let me ask you in our last 30 seconds here, are you still adamantly convinced Brexit is going to happen?
No, I don't think I'm adamantly convinced. Certainly, it's pushing a lot towards that. The conversation has really been that it is going to happen one way or the other. But we should really wait and see what the people say in this, if there is this election in early December, and there will possibly be an opportunity there to pull back and revoke the notice given under Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union. It's still a possibility, maybe a slight one.
The drama continues. Oonagh Fitzgerald, we're really grateful you could spare some time for us on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.